As the Dolphins' next wave of contract extensions loom, what other contracts across the league should Miami be worried about beating if they want to save themselves some money in the process?
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. The focus from a contract extension perspective is squarely on Tua Tagovailoa, and we'll talk about Tua throughout the course of today's show. But there's a few other players, members of the 2021 draft class, perhaps, that the Dolphins need to be mindful of as far as making long-term decisions with. And if they want to optimize the market for signing a player, being proactive and setting the market and getting these extensions done sooner rather than later would probably behoove them. This is not just playing the game with Jalen Waddle, whose contract extension is done. This is not just playing the game now with Tua Tagovailoa. This is applicable at effectively, I guess, even running back now that Christian McCaffrey got a reworked deal and got a raise. It's effective in every position room across the league. And the longer you wait, the price is only going to go up because salaries are going to skyrocket. And the Dolphins had the luxury of securing a number of starters from their 2020 foundational draft class with Austin Jackson, who's turned into a good player, and Tua Tagovailoa, who's developed into a good starting quarterback in the NFL. And you didn't get your hit with Noah Igbenogany with your third first-round pick. You hit with Robert Hunt, so much so that from a positional value perspective, it didn't justify retaining his services. You, I guess, hit at safety with Brandon Jones in the third round. I guess you hit with Raekwon Davis in the second round. Those guys got big money contracts, all things considered, to go elsewhere and play football this year. But the 2022 class is kind of the, wow, holy smokes, they hit it out of the park class. When you consider it is Jevon Holland, Jalen Waddle, Jaelan Phillips, and Liam Eichenberg. We'll see if he can kind of change the narrative around who he is as a player this year in the same way that Austin Jackson did last year. But Jevon Holland spoke during minicamp and OTAs and said, look, like I'm focused on ball. It's if Tua ain't got his extension done yet, like they're in all likelihood not going to come to me. I'm paraphrasing there. But that's where we're going to start today, because we haven't really given Jevon focus as far as an option to give a contract extension to, although he has certainly earned one from Miami. The question is, what's the spending ceiling? What's the spending floor? The focus today, though, is who do you have to beat? Like, what are the teams across the league have decisions left on paying safeties that you need to be wary of? If you wait and you let these other ones get done, you might cost yourself money. And I think that's the world that we're living in now with the Tua Tagovailoa contract. Now that Trevor Lawrence got his extension and it matched Joe Burrow, I think the Dolphins are at a point now where you could probably say you've cost yourself a little bit of money by waiting to try to get as accurate of a picture of the market as you possibly can. At safety, it's a fascinating group because there's a lot of good safeties that are still out there in free agency, right? Quandre Diggs and Justin Simmons are still sitting out there in free agency waiting for a team to sign them. And those were big money players at the position. Now, you did see Xavier McKinney, who's in the prime of his career, signed for $16, $17 million per season on average with the Green Bay Packers. You saw Kyle Duggar sign an extension after getting the transition tag from the New England Patriots that's equal to about $14 million per season. Who's next in line, along with Jevon Holland, as far as options for players across the league to get paid? This is a market. I think you do have a good blend of older guys that still warrant big money, maybe not market reset money that went to Antoine Winfield Jr. I think the damage has been done in that regard, right? He reset the defensive back market. He got over 21 million per season. I think it's a 4-year, 84 and change was what Antoine Winfield Jr. signed with Tampa Bay. But I look at the other young standouts at safety that are coming up on contracts. And the one who stands out the most to me, aside of Jevon Holland, is Talanoa Hufanga with the San Francisco 49ers. Now, he was the 180th pick in the 2021 NFL draft for the San Francisco 49ers. He, like Jevon Holland, has received a playtime adjustment and performance adjustment that's built into the collective bargaining agreement. If you far outperform your rookie contract based on workload, you do get an adjustment into the tail end of your rookie contract. You're seeing that with Talanoa Hufanga, who's due almost $5 million cap charge this year. He's due almost $4.9 million in salary for the upcoming season. He's been a standout for San Francisco. He really blossomed in 2022, in which he played 96% of the snaps. He had 4 interceptions, 9 passes defensed. He had 2 sacks that season. He had 95 tackles. That performance paired with this year, he missed 7 games, but still had 3 interceptions. A couple of really productive years for Talanoa Hufanga at safety that, San Francisco's maybe a little cash strapped. Maybe they don't go down that route to pay Talanoa Hufanga because they do have a lot of big contracts that they have to be mindful of. But his emergence as a player is the next one in line that if you're like, hey, who's the next young guy that might get that kind of jolt? Hufanga's the one to be mindful of and be wary of. I think the good news for Miami is if you are tracking salary cap space for the upcoming season, the 49ers right now are about $30 million more in the red than Miami is. Miami's close to break even based on the forecasted salary cap hit for the upcoming year in 2025. San Francisco is in the red. They will definitively be in the red. So I guess that's a silver lining. I think maybe that helps you. There's a few other standout players at the safety position that are really good players, but they're older players. It's guys like Budda Baker, who's already on a $14+ million per year contract. It's Justin Reed, who's on a $10.5 million per year contract with the Kansas City Chiefs. It's Harrison Smith, who's 36 years old and is kind of already having salary adjustments to his contract. I think that helps you. So maybe that's why there hasn't really been a sense of urgency kind of this offseason, reading between the lines from Miami with Jevon. But that is still one that I look across the options. And Trayvon Morrig's a good player too with the Raiders. I don't know that he's in that stratosphere of a player, but Morrig's a good player as well. I think that's the other one to kind of just keep an eye on and acknowledge that he could get paid. He had about 80 tackles last year, 11 total passes defense. He had 3 interceptions in 2023, kind of came into his own finally after being a promising player out of TCU. He was drafted in the 2nd round. Yeah, number 43 overall for Trayvon Morrig. So those are the names that I have at safety that are like, if you want to get Jevon in and make sure you get the best fair price for Jevon without allowing other teams to dictate like what the floor is, that's where you look. That's the names that you have to just be wary of. If they come through, it might cost you money. Now we're going to have this same conversation with the edge group with Jaelan Phillips, who obviously is coming off of a season-ending injury last year, so his circumstances are a little unique, but we're going to dive into Jaelan just to know and be familiar with the next edge guys up. That's up next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. The NFL schedule is out. There's no shortage of promising games for you to attend this fall. And if you are interested in getting tickets to any NFL game, this fall. Get your tickets with Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time saves you up to 60% off buying last-minute deals for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have flash and zone deals to save you even more money and all-in pricing, so there's no surprises when you put the tickets into your cart and go to check out. I also love their panoramic seat views, so you know the sight lines before you commit to buying tickets. And you can, with just a few taps of your phone, get your tickets delivered directly to your phone. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today for last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Jaelan Phillips and the Edge Group. Man, I hope Jaelan Phillips gives you that level of performance that you it becomes a no-brainer to give him a contract extension. I know this is obviously a complicated decision for Miami because you just use your first-round pick in Chop Robinson. You have Bradley Chubb on a big money contract already. He's going to have injury guarantees for 2025 that if he's not healthy, you might be on the hook for. I think you already have some contracts that complicate this a little bit. Hassan Reddick looming as a player that wants to get into that mid-20s value as far as annual average salary. He's holding out from the New York Jets, did not attend mandatory minicamp, so he took some fines after getting traded from the Eagles to the Jets. Right now, the Edge group as a whole, there's a big gap between the top five guys. You've got Myles Garrett at 25, TJ Watt at 28, Brian Burns, who just got traded from the Panthers to the Giants, he got 28.2. Josh Allen was on the franchise tag for the Jaguars. He signed a $141 million contract extension that put him at 28.25. And they all check in below Nick Bosa's $34 million per season. So needless to say, if you put yourself into that stratosphere, the money's big. And there's a large strike zone between 34 and 25 to kind of park players within the top five, or I guess if you're adding more to that, that would be the top 6, 7, 8, whatever, at the position. I would expect Hassan Reddick will get something done between now and the start of the season that will not be one that's of consequence to Miami as a result. The silver lining is that Jaelan Phillips, I think realistically, is the top edge guy from the 2021 draft class. It was Kwity Paye was the other one who was kind of in consideration as far as the top of the draft. He got drafted by the Colts. He didn't really manifest in the same way that Jaelan Phillips has, although Phillips coming off of an injury. I'm just trying to think if I'm forgetting any other standout defensive end types from that draft class. It was like Peyton Turner went in the first round. I guess Gregory Rousseau and Odafe Owe from Baltimore. Some interesting parallels between that Baltimore scheme and Owe and his emergence as a player. Malcolm Kuntz has become a nice player for the Raiders, but not anywhere near that stratosphere of where we expect Jaelan Phillips to be from a contract extension standpoint. That draft class, it was the guys in the back half of the first round that really moved the needle. So Buffalo with Gregory Rousseau, who I think took a big step this past year. Gregory Rousseau's kind of the best available option for Buffalo's pass rush when you consider Von Miller, an aging, descending player who wasn't himself coming off of an injury from the previous season. And I know Gregory Rousseau only had 5 sacks last year, but he's young in the prime of his career. He's just turned 24 years old. Had a lot of quarterback pressures, knockdowns, elite length. They play high volume snap rotation. He only played 60% of the snaps. I think maybe all that works against him being a top of market guy. Odafe Owe, I think, is maybe a little bit more emergent as a player who, if he continues on the trajectory that he's on, maybe makes a bit of a splash. But Baltimore just paid Justin Madubuike market top of market contract on the interior defensive line. So kind of the same thing as Jevon Holland in the safety market, where it's not as hot, right? And there's the wide receiver market this year, the quarterback market every year. These are where it gets really intense. And I think it bodes well for Miami that they should have a little bit of time with Jaelan Phillips to get some clarity on Jaelan Phillips. They do already have the 5th-year option with him for 2025, which you do not have for Jevon Holland as an early second-round pick. But just kind of assessing the landscape. I think the names from that draft class that are maybe in the same running, and I think Phillips is the best pass rusher out of all of them. I think he's the best player out of all of them when he's healthy, is Owe. I would probably put it Owe, Rousseau, and then Kwity Paye in that order from that 2021 draft class as guys that are good, reliable players, but their production, Phillips from a pass rush production, Owe has 13 career sacks, right? Greg Rousseau has 17 career sacks. Jaelan Phillips was on pace for the double-digit sack count, right? He has 22 career sacks, 8.5, 7, and then 6.5 in 8 games this past year. I mean, that was a 15 sack pace if he was healthy for the whole season. So you're in the driver's seat there, which makes you feel good. But the Hassan Reddick's kind of the next big contract to drop. And if everything clicks for Jaelan Phillips, that might be a measuring stick for you as far as the economics of that deal and how that stacks into your next Jaelan Phillips contract, assuming that you want to have one, which I think you should, because good players are the premium. And we do have to talk about quarterback. I know we've exhausted a lot of these talking points with Tua Tagovailoa, but a little bit more of that looms here next on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. I've already alluded to this, but the tipping point you've reached. I do think you have cost yourself some money here by waiting and not getting it done. Now, there's a whole other school of thought about letting him play this year out and then doing the franchise tag, and you can franchise tag him twice, and I get that. I think for the benefit of the entire team and the competitive nature of 2024, 2025, and 2026, that is not a very attractive option because those are static salary cap hits that you can't do anything with if you franchise tag a player, right? So if you intend on having a 3-year window with Tua and competing for the next 3 years, just do the contract extension, have the flexibility, and if it all goes awry by 2026, you can flush out the system, have a transitional year with a young player who doesn't cost a lot, and do it over again, right? And it allows you to maintain a lot of the nucleus of the team, and they're nowhere near the stratosphere of up against the glass ceiling as they were in 2018 when they decided to flush everybody out and tear it all the way down to the studs. I think even if there's ideological changes or football operation changes that come with Miami in the next 3-4 years, they have a lot more to work with. They have a lot more foundation. They have a lot more young players than what those teams did in 16, 17, and 18. But there's more room to lose money if you wait. If your intent is to have Tua Tagovailoa under contract, the Dak Prescott and Jordan Love contracts are the big ones. And I would expect Jordan Love will have the opportunity to kind of pressure the Packers. They should be very excited about what Jordan Love did as in his first year as a starter last year, especially how he got better down the stretch. And Green Bay has the flexibility. And if they're going to get out in front of the rising tide of all of this, it probably is going to take more than 55 to get it done with Jordan Love. And whether that's crazy or not, that's the market's the market. as Tua Tagovailoa said. So that is one where that gives more ammunition to Tua's camp to negotiate with Miami if that gets done. But the Dak one's the big one. And there's a whole other set of questions about Dak and postseason success. And who do you really beat in the regular season? Can you beat good teams? Like people joke about Miami being the AFC Cowboys, right? But Dak Prescott, with his floor as a player and also his ceiling as a player, if he were to hit the open market, he would do, and I think even if he doesn't, and if Dallas just gives him a contract extension, he will be equivalent to Justin Jefferson's blow to the wide receiver market. The wide receiver market coming into this offseason was $30 million with Tyreek Hill. Amon-Ra St. Brown just edges over top of it. A.J. Brown edges to 32. And Justin Jefferson gets 35, right? It's a whole different tick in stratosphere, just like the Nick Bosa contract that we just talked about with the Edge group. It's in the stratosphere by itself. If you see Trevor Lawrence and Jordan Love and Tua, and they're kind of floating around 55, Dak with his resume and with his leverage against Dallas from a salary cap hit perspective, he's due a big salary cap charge this year. Like Dallas really needs to get something done to facilitate some more flexibility to sign Micah Parsons and sign CeeDee Lamb. They got big guys that are kind of ticked off that they don't have contracts work right now, but they have to have the big piece done. I expect that to go like 55, 56 up to 60. And you see a lot of insiders alluding to Dak Prescott potentially being the first NFL $60 million a year player. And if that one happens, now you have a whole other gap between the top guy and the next guys in line for negotiations to wiggle. So I think the Jordan Love contract gives to his camp more to work with if he kind of comes in where you'd expect, which is in line with Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence. But if the Dak one gets done, then I think that now gives you a $5 million strike zone that they're going to try to negotiate within. So names to watch: Trevon Moehrig, a little bit. Talanoa Hufanga, I think, is the big one at safety for Miami. I think probably Odafe Owe on the edge. Hassan Reddick to a lesser degree. I think that one's inevitable. That gets done. It's not quite a one-for-one comparison. And then Dak Prescott, Jordan Love. Those are kind of like the next guys in line for Miami. If you're hoping for these player extensions to get done and you want to give what's fair market price and not let other teams dictate the terms of what the cost is going to be, those are the kinds of guys you got to get out in front of. That's going to do it for us here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. I hope you enjoyed. We have a great next show coming your way, and that's all I will say for now. Make sure you keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Fins up.